Today's event will awaken your soul. For this request, you will see the incident at once to the end. What happened in the grave with a virtuous, rich, pious woman will blow your mind. A person said my wife used to feed thousands of people every day. She got married many orphan girls with dowry. If a poor person came, she would donate money to them. She also built 3 mosques, but when she died, 2 dogs came and sat in her grave. They kicked and howled in the grave. Almost everyone was scared to hear their voice. One day I dug my wife's grave again with Imam Sahib, and what I saw made my heart burst because my wife Subhana belonged from a very big and rich family. But till today she never expressed her desire for money. She used to wear simple clothes and we didn't even have a maid in our home. She used to live in a small village in Multan city and was the daughter of a Pir Sahib. Here her father and grandfather earned a lot of respect along with money. They were also zamindars but looked like ordinary people. Whether you are Hindu or Muslim, watch the video till the end without dragging. Friends, before starting the video, let's pray a little. Oh Allah, save us from all kinds of sins. All those who want to avoid sins, write in the comments Amen and give a like to this video. And those who have not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe to the channel. Like, target of this video is 10,000, so please like this video. So let's begin. My name is Javed and I used to live in Multan city. Subhana was my maternal cousin, so I got married to her. My life was very good with Subhana. I have been married for 10 years and Allah has blessed us with 2 children. During these 10 years, she did many kinds of work. At least 1,000 people were fed food for free every day in Multan city by my wife. My wife got married many orphan girls by donating dowry. She had built 3 mosques. If I start talking about my wife's good deeds, maybe the whole day will pass. But today, I was very sad because my wife Subhana died. She had a sudden heart attack and died that night. People of the clan were very surprised because there was happiness in our house, and we didn't fight like a normal husband and wife. But it is unable to change what is written. She suddenly had a heart attack and died. My children were crying badly because of such a big shock, and my relatives were handling them. I was sitting among the men in a sad state and my brain stopped working. I couldn't think what would happen to my house now. How will I spend my life without my wife? More importantly, my daughter and son were very young, and no one could give them the love of a mother. After arranging my wife's bath and kafan, the people of the house called me inside the house so that I could have one last look at my wife before the funeral. When I went inside and saw the wife, my mind started to sink. I was a man still. I started crying a lot because I loved my wife so much. She was a very noble woman. It was very difficult for me to say goodbye to my wife, but I endured it, and I carried my yacht to the funeral home. When I returned home after burying my wife, I came to know that my younger daughter was in a very bad condition. She was very close to her mother, and because of this, she could not bear all this. She was a 4-year-old child. I forgot my sorrows and started to take care of my daughter. But her fever was high. It was still daytime, so I went to the hospital with my daughter. The doctor managed to reduce her fever with great difficulty, but by this time it was late afternoon, and when I returned home with the baby, she wanted to get away from me. I couldn't go to my wife's grave a second time that day to cope with her, and the second day passed like that. After these 2 days, my daughter's condition improved a little, so I put her to sleep at noon and went to my wife's grave. When I reached the crematorium, 2 dogs inside the graveyard started barking and suddenly started kicking my wife's grave. I tried to drive them away, but they kept barking and I could see tears in their eyes. I was able to drive those dogs away with great difficulty. Then I started reciting Surah Fatiha at my wife's grave and got up after a while and went home. Since then, I used to spend about an hour at my wife's grave every day. But whenever I went near my wife's grave, the 2 dogs started barking. I scared them away. But this thing started to worry me, and I started to think, I don't know what those 2 dogs do with my wife's grave after I leave. I had kept my wife's grave clean until now. It was a sin to plant something in the grave, so I was afraid if the dogs dig the grave again. I used to rush the dogs on my way home and think about my wife until I got home. I have never seen a dog dig a grave in my life. My wife's grave was very well made, and there was no problem digging it, even though I don't know why those two dogs were roaming around my wife's grave. After a few days, the guests left the house, so our house returned to routine. The three of us could feel the absence of my wife very well. My children used to cry when they used to notice their mother. When I started going to work, it became difficult for my children to stay at home. So I kept a servant in my house, and that woman lived in my wife's village, and she was a woman without children. So I keep her in my house to take care of my kids. That lady took care of the children very well, so my children started to become normal, and I also became resilient. I made it a habit to visit my wife's grave, and I used to go there from time to time and sit and recite for a long time. Those two dogs still saw me and wandered around my wife's grave and barked at me and tried to dig my wife's grave. At first, I would angrily chase them away, but now I am worried, thinking why they come to my wife's grave instead of all other graves. But it was not possible to dig the grave without any reason. I cannot dig my wife's grave because of the behavior of a stupid animal. I used to ignore the signals of the dogs for many days, but my mind started to be completely restless, and during the night I tried to sleep, but I couldn't sleep. One night, when I slept, I dreamed that my wife was locked in one of the rooms and there was a fire around the room. My wife was crying, very worried, but she could not say anything, but I could understand her pain. Yet at that moment my eyes opened and my whole body was drenched in sweat and I was in a very bad state. I sat with my hands on my head for a long time and began to think that my wife was a very good and religious woman. Then I thought about my wife all day, so maybe I had this dream. I forgot this dream early in the morning and got busy in the battle of life. But that day when I went to the graveside, the dog was sitting between the two graves. Seeing them, I realized my dream and I killed them without thinking. But when I slept at night, I saw that dream again. This time I saw that my wife was helplessly burnt in the fire of that room, and I was standing outside watching everything. When I opened my eyes, I was very worried. I don't know how to go deeper into this topic. I went to the masjid early the next morning and told Imam Sahib about my problem. At first, Imam Sahib heard about the two dogs and said that they are animals and doing all these things without understanding anything. You should spread some thorn trees in your wife's grave for a few days, so that the animals cannot reach there. But when I told Imam Sahib about my dream, Imam Sahib looked at me shocked. Imam Sahib also got worried after hearing about the same dream for 2 days regularly. Then he began to say that there are two types of dreams, one from Shaitan and one from Allah. Imam Sahib said that this dream may be a sign from Allah or Shaitan is tempting you. That's why you wait for one more night. If you see that dream tonight too, then come to me. I will think about the solution of this problem till then. Then I went home and got my kids to school before I got ready for work. My wife kept coming to my mind and I was praying that the dream was a dream of the devil, because redigging one's grave is not an easy task. I did not want my wife's last home to be destroyed. For me, seeing those two dogs at my wife's grave was too much to bear. But that night the dream came again. I began to think that my wife might be in some trouble in the grave. I was seeing clearly in the dream that the fire was not harming my wife, but that fire surrounded my wife, and I could not understand this. My wife was a daughter of a noble Peer clan. She had never seen a strange man. After marriage, I never saw her miss namaz. She also gave Islamic training to the children, and she was also trustworthy to me. But I don't know if she was not at peace in the grave. The third time I had that dream, I was so disturbed that I could not sleep that day and stayed awake until morning. When the Fajr call was given, I quickly performed ablution and headed towards the mosque. I prayed and waited for Imam Sahib. When Namazis got up, I went to Imam Sahib and told him, "Imam Sahib, I had that dream again tonight." I became restless and asked Imam Sahib to tell me some way so that my wife can sleep peacefully in her grave. And that dream didn't bother me either. Imam Sahib took a deep breath and said that the last way is to dig the grave. He said, "God forbid, if the grave. If the miracle of Allah is revealed, we will not be able to dig graves because we will not get permission from Allah. And if there is any other reason, then we will look into it, and maybe it will come out somehow." Imam Sahib's words made my hair stand on end. I could not even think about Allah's punishment on my wife. When I was moving towards the graveside with Imam Sahib, my feet began to ache, and I was praying to Allah again and again that there would be no other problem in my wife's grave, that there would be no punishment from Allah. I told Imam Sahib that my wife was very good. God's punishment cannot come upon her. She did good deeds all her life. Her father was also a good man. Imam Sahib said that only Allah knows the heart, and Allah forgives the biggest sins. O Ghafur ur Rahim, but he caught small sins also. That's why people are told to be careful. They have to stay away from small sins, no matter how small. Who knows, that act may be displeasing to Allah. Even today when we reached the graveside, I saw those 2 dogs digging my wife's grave. When I went ahead to chase them, Imam Sahib said, "Do not kill them. Maybe they are doing this by Allah's order. For this reason, remove them politely and dig the place where they were digging first." Hearing Imam Sahib's words, I shook my head and moved forward. I removed the dogs and started removing the soil where the dogs were digging. Friends, if you like the video so far, then please give a like to the video. After that, both the dogs relaxed and sat in one place. I was reciting Durood Sharif in my mind. When I dug down to the depths of that pit, my liver burst at the sight. I screamed and moved away from the grave. Imam Sahib, who was standing behind me, he stepped forward and he looked into the dig. Imam Sahib was reciting Istighfar, and on the other side I was crying like a child. I was consumed by the thought that my wife was suffering so much and I didn't know it. I was crying because of sorrow, and Imam Sahib's body was shaking. I could see in my late wife's grave the most horrible sight of my life. I looked at the dogs beckoning me for so long, but those stupid animals still wanted to help me. Imam Sahib asked me if you ever had a feeling that someone had done this by digging your wife's grave. I told Imam Sahib that I come to my wife's grave every day, but I did not notice any other condition in this grave except these dogs. But I used to drive them away from here. Imam Sahib was surprised to hear my words and said it could be that this work can be done without digging the grave. To do the work done with your wife, it is necessary to dig the grave. Suddenly, the Imam said, "Did you notice anything when your wife was lowered into the grave?" I nodded my head and said yes. And no matter how sad I was, but my wife was brought down to the grave in front of my eyes. So then there was no opportunity to do such work. Imam Sahib asked me to call the police at that moment. I called the police at that moment and handed over everything to them. I was very sick of crying. SP Sahib was consoling me. Police then started investigating thoroughly, and for some days the police dressed in white clothes and started guarding the graveside. After 12 days of looking after, my wife's criminal was diagnosed. That day, some people brought a corpse of a woman, and well, the accused person came that night, and he was digging a new grave. The police, who were hiding, caught the man. They told me that from now on there will be no more trouble in the graveyard. But even then I had no peace in my mind, and every day again I visited my wife's grave and looked at her grave, so that nothing like this happens to him a second time. The fear inside me was not going away. I was always consumed by the thought that my wife's grave was not dug again. When I told my friends about it, they said that just like people are kept to guard the house, people should be kept to look after the grave so that no one can do bad things to the dead person. My friends were agreeing with my words after listening to me, but I knew they weren't too interested. People think that the dead person is in the custody of Allah. It is not our responsibility to take care of them. Maybe it is true, but seeing the situation that has come up now, I feel that we should protect the graves as well. I was getting worse day by day, and one day I asked my housekeeper if you ever heard of bloodied dolls being kept in graves or anything that scares people. The old lady got stuck because of my strange question and got scared and asked to repent. "What are you saying, son? I have never heard that. No one will give a hand to the grave again." I fell silent after hearing such a simple word from that woman. I knew that no one would believe me. Under normal circumstances, I would have thought this was ridiculous. But now I know that it happens, because I saw 2 or 3 small dolls in my wife's grave with blood smeared on them and large needles stuck in them. I don't know who those dolls are. Why did the 2 defendants keep them? The grave was so terrible that nothing was coming out of my head. After in my wife's grave because of the dolls. I took out those dolls with the help of Imam Sahib, but my mind was still quite restless. The scene of the grave was so terrible that nothing was coming out of my head. After that I again went to Imam Sahib. He saw me and got up from the people and came to me and asked what happened. "You seem very worried." I replied that I could not sleep at night after watching that scene because I kept thinking that my wife should not be in such a situation again. We should hire a man to look after the grave. Imam Sahib softened this and said, "Don't worry. From next, nothing like that will happen, and to take care of the place, we should go to the graves of our loved ones and recite Surah Fatiha and read the Quran every day. Imam Sahib said, "You go to your wife's grave every day and there will be no problem." Then he regretted and said, "I don't know what happened to the Muslims. They are constantly drowning in shirk." Imam Sahib said that those who practice black magic do such things, and black magic has been forbidden in our Islam, and it is called shirk by Almighty Allah, and shirk is a sin for which there is no forgiveness. Imam Sahib told me that you are very lucky that you got a sign from Allah. I cried and said that my wife was very good, so it seems that Allah has removed her restlessness and suffering. Many such incidents happen.